So I've got about 25 minutes of material to give to you, and my goal in lunch is to give you thought food, or food for thought. Kara asked me, okay, what can you tell this group about the larger scale context of what they're doing? And that's my objective today, is to give you one concept of how all this stuff could be structured. It is Michigan based. Don't hold that against me. You can strip off the word Michigan, and it could be applicable in small or large part to what you guys might be doing here in Maine, but that's for you guys to decide. I'm going to give you effectively a approach of how we brought the system to change based upon the findings that we had, similar to what you guys are doing right now. If you were with me back in September, you may have seen this image. All right, the screen's not really large, so I apologize. You're probably not going to be able to see all the words. And it's more for the graphics that I want you to see this. But back home, we went through a little bit of a similar process of identifying the system, actions, and structure necessary to change, to deliver, and back home, good places, or placemaking. You may have heard that. So, and prosperity driven on that. Prosperity being social, economic, financial, ecological, and physiological across those major realms, which is founded in all the research. So the organizational approach was in 6 stages or 6 modules, which were starting to get people to understand, whoever they were, electeds, appointed, general citizens, to understand that there's a strong relationship between people and places and the process of placemaking. Second area was, what does all the research tell us? And you all are experts here. You know what the research says. The research shows, when it's collected together, that investments in compact, infrastructure-supported communities is the best return ecologically, sociologically, economically, financially, and physiologically, meaning health, physiological. Okay? So that was the repository there. What comes in areas 3, 4, and 5 are how you actually do it. 3 was, what are the components or the Lego kit of parts of neighborhoods, streets, connections, buildings, like what we talked about here at this table, which is what are the building types that could be understood by all parties in practice, right? And such. So that's the Lego kit. Next is, what is the process of how you get to it? Our focus in Michigan was on form. Form of urban, suburban, natural, rural environments, and the relationship of buildings and mass. And how you regulate that. That led us to push hard form-based coding. Another conversation we'll have another time if you want. Okay? Next is how you engage it at community level, and the focus there was shredding. You've heard me say that phrase before. If you were here with me earlier, shredding. Get everybody in a room like today, make it happen. Give you a license, make it happen. Almost always, the public has the sense in the eye of where they want to go, what's good form, what's good building, what's good placemaking. They just need to be facilitated. And then finally comes the tools. How do you actually make it happen? And within the toolkit is what I'm going to focus on today, which is the toolkits not just of local action, but that of the state. Because ultimately, you as local communities in planning, zoning, and doing your development review process, you're all creatures of your state, subject to enabling legislation, right? Okay, that's where the power lies across all of the 50 states. So, you're in this process of developing or identifying your system or components of your system and issues with the components of the system. And in a little while here, you're going to start talking about remedies. Okay? I know remedies as opposed to solutions because solutions connote the solution to the whole system. And often it's remedies to fix this area, this area, this area in total, which is the ultimate solution system-wide. But the question for you, not to act today, but think about is, once you do all this, the stuff before up to now and the stuff you will do, how is this going to get implemented? How is it going to get implemented? Well, there are a couple of major historic approaches to this, all right? And us government people will choose all ourselves. I'm not talking about any of us in this room. But in recent past, across many of the states, the first and foremost approach has been considered to be the government implements through edict or through order or through requirement or through, not order, but through directive, mandate. Okay? In some states that's been successful. Nope. Oregon. In other states, not so much. Because we are a democracy and we have citizen involvement, what I like to say is sometimes, and in some states like my own, if the government were to mandate, we would get what I call the 30-40-30 response. What does that mean? 30% of the respondents' population constituents would say, bang on, we should have done that 25 years ago, let's do more. Another 30% is going to start to run to pitchforks. And the 40% are spread in between. That's the 30-40-30. There is benefit, but there's also risk and limitation to mandate. An alternative approach, and that's the approach we took, was to look at it from another basic context of how land and development and society operates in the United States, which is through the investment of people and corporations and governments and such. We are a market-based economy, not just economically and financially, but socially, ecologically, even physiologically, meaning we spend time in investing assets, resources, time, understanding that there is intended to be a return on that investment to improve us. In other words, prosperity. Right? And that is pervasive. I see head shaking, yes, you recognize that. But what if the system had a component to that which had an incentive or an investment base as opposed to a mandate base? That is the door opener for which how we approached it, and it may have some benefit for you to hear this and think about this as it goes to how you work this down the road. Okay, Jim, what is this slide? First of all, it's hard to read over on the left side. But how many of you have heard of the ISO? Raise your hand, please. Okay, about half of you. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, is essentially a collection of subordinate organizations which run across all of the major industries, a lot of major industries. And you've probably heard phrases like ISO 9001 or 15,000 or whatever, and you've heard companies or you've seen advertisements of companies saying that we are ISO 9001 certified, right? Does that sound familiar to you out there? Yep. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Over here on the left, you won't be able to read, I'm sorry. But what I'm showing you is a process for how one industry, and for today's presentation we'll call it the widget industry. The widget industry organizes with its proprietors of firms and individuals to identify, arrive, and come to consensus on what are the standards. What are the standards for in which widgets are to be manufactured? What are the standards for raw materials to go into that? What are the standards for production process? What are the standards for quality control? What are the standards for distribution? What are the standards? Okay? You might be thinking to yourself, okay, why is that needed? Well, if you're a widget buyer, okay, whether you're an individual or a corporation or you use widgets to make cars or whatever you're doing, what you want to know when you approach the Cara Corporation, who's the widget manufacturer, you want to be able to say, okay, I can rely upon a minimum level of quality and standard on the widgets I buy from you, because I'm putting them into my car, and I'm selling my car to John Shattuck, and if I don't have quality control in my widgets in the car, that might be a problem if it breaks down while they drive in the car, right? Okay? So I'm sure it makes sense to you. This is a standard protocol across almost all of the major industries worldwide. It's been there for a number of years. ISO, okay? The development of standards and the review and evaluation to meet and certify on those standards, which achieves a seal, but allows for activity and production to happen beyond that, okay? Now, if you must, you might be already ahead thinking, okay, what do you mean by that, Jim? Let's think about that in a governmental context. In these two images, I'm trying to show you that two major studies that were done. About 7 years ago, Smart Growth America, some of you know Smart Growth America, right? National organization. They did a major analysis, and the nuts of the report are this, is that if you took all the federal agencies that had discretionary fund dollars that they had and lumped them all together, that'd be HUD and EDA and you name them around, EPA and stuff like that, and you assembled all their discretionary funding and looked at it, that is the number, $450 million annually, that is available and expended on projects and activities which influence the built environment, aka real estate.
Billion.
What did I say? Billion. Thank you. Thank you. It is billion. It is billion. Similarly, in Michigan, our run of those numbers across our agencies, meaning transportation, economic development, housing, natural resources, environmental quality, ag and resource development, land banking and such, came up with $571 million. Right? In other words, in Michigan, total of all those programs, whether they are direct expenditures out of appropriations from the legislature or they are federal pass-throughs, okay, the combination of those, about $570 million. And it's grown a little bit since then, but that's it is spent on projects that directly influence communities, the built environment, and real estate. You follow me so far? Now think about how those dollars are spread across those agencies and how coordinated they are. Right? Now imagine if the state, like us, said, okay, our first obligation is to invest monies to protect the health, welfare, safety of the people of the state at the best return that we can get, because we are those awards of the public's money. Follow me? Okay? If we take that investment approach, right, then the state, through its knowledge and practice of research and across, becomes perhaps the number one, or certainly a top 2 or top 3 real estate investor across that state. And it's the case here in Maine, I'm sure, just like it is in Michigan and just about every other state. So if you start to bring these pieces together, which is the state looks at its expenditure of resources not as a distribution of spreading salt and pepper across all the communities, but doing that by saying we're going to spread the distribution of salt and pepper across communities to make the best impact socially, economically, financially, ecologically, and physiologically to the citizens and the benefits of the state, the context starts to change. And the state then becomes looking like Jim Tischler or Cara Company wanting to purchase widgets, okay? Because they want to get the best return out of the purchase for what they're going to do with the result. And so that potentially leads to the idea of what would happen if the state, as part of its wise, smart expenditures, were to utilize its pocketbook to drive its customers or its beneficiaries, aka local units, to meet standards like an ISO. You still with me? Now, I got to say one thing. This is all voluntary, right? If we're in the widget business, I can say, I'm not going to do ISO 9001. No problem. Okay, I make that choice. Who's going to buy my product? Right? That's the quid pro quo. It's voluntary, but you have to realize the implication of choosing to or to not participate. So those two concepts underlie this system that we built called redevelopment ready communities. All right? Giving communities the ability to empower, giving them standards to look to review, analyze, and certify on, and then rewarding them to say if you meet those ISO-like standards, then you are at primary position for the expenditure of the public's monies through the state programs, because we already know through the research practice that those expenditures on those communities that have those process plans and policies to go is going to likely result in the best expenditure, health, safety, financial welfare of the citizens of that community and the state as a whole. The guiding principles within this system are, and I heard these words in your group discussions, predictability, transparent, efficient, in partnership, with a vision, self-determination, self-help, to execute on a proactive basis. Think about those. in a systematic standards format, those all come to play if they're incorporated and actually drive outcome which harness all of the myriad of activities or issues that you guys are talking about as systematic issues, or hopefully as when we start talking about remedies to issue some of those in harness and in format, unison format to get there. What is this approach? What is this ISO? What is it comprised of? Well, there are 6 major areas to it. I'm going to touch upon each of them briefly. You won't see all the detail today. That's another conversation to go as we go. But Area 1, or Section 1, community plans. Yep, planning and outreach. Section 2, zoning regulations. If this sounds like it's working through the municipal comprehensive planning and regulation process, yep, that's what it is. 3, development review. 4, recruitment and education, meaning recruitment of citizens to participate and developers and a whole education component. Remember I showed you the curriculum? That's where it actually fits in many places, but that's where it fits there as well as a baseline support mechanism. 5 is community prosperity, identifying projects in partnership which actually benefit developers in the community tied to the whole system. And 6 is the sites that you have in your town or your city or your village and how you actually proactively move them through once you achieve that level of, whatever that level is, of standardization of certification to go. Okay, briefly touch upon these areas. Practice 1, or standard set 1, community plans and public outreach. This area focuses into exactly what you think, the plans, your goals, the actions, the timelines, responsible parties. But the intent and the driving element to this is implementation. Or as I like to say, not planning for development. Flip it, development planning. In other words, driving not just development for developers, but change in the built environment, which is economically, ecologically, physiologically, financially beneficial and productive for your community, and using that to drive your comprehensive planning process. All right? It's understood by us in the planning community, but our focus on plans first, then implementation, sometimes roadblocks us to thinking about how we actually streamline and move through to execute our best plans and our best projects. All right? This approach says, think about that as a principal objective and drive the rest of the system components to head towards that. It's just too small a print, I apologize for that. What I'm showing you here is, this is ISO in play, which is, there's an evaluation criteria. The governing body has adopted a master plan in the past 5 years. In Michigan, we require plans to be created or updated on a 5-year cycle. Okay? All right, so this is one of the most basic criteria. So basic, it's 1.1.1. All right? And what are the expectations in that plan? Well, here's where this gets interesting. Okay? The master plan reflects the community's idea or desired direction. The master plan identifies strategies. The master plan addresses land use, is an infrastructure, including complete streets. The master plan includes a zoning plan, incorporates recommendations for implementation, goals, actions. Most of this stuff you're already doing. It's in your enabling legislation. It's happening in municipalities in Maine. But what we're doing here in some of these areas is we're starting to incorporate some key elements that are unique or maybe should be common that should be done across the entire municipality. And you'll see those peppered through here too as well. 1.1.2 says the governing body has approved a downtown plan. Now that would apply for local units that have downtowns or village centers, stuff like that. And so if not, these are the elements that are there. And that's, look at this more for format, a little bit for content for format. There's a standard with a criteria that needs to be addressed or met, and then there are expectations to show the practitioners, the players, the users, the purchasers, this is what we expect in order to achieve meeting evaluation criteria. It's an ISO system. That's what it is. Here's zoning regulations, practice number 2. Foundational elements, will that look familiar to you? Foundational elements, right out of our placemaking curriculum, right out of the information and the communication I'm hearing from you all today, bringing this in as a platform base. The objective is to encourage and have communities be able to regulate and allow for the mix of housing types. Promoting non-motorized, having concentrated areas of development, and in those concentration of areas, requiring or permitting or encouraging by right permitting. Flexible parking. It's not elimination of parking yet. I'll get back to that in a minute. But it's flexible parking, which is, in many communities back home, has been a remarkable shift because most zoning regulations say you have to have parking minimums. And that presents a big monster issue, as most of you know. But by saying, the start of the change is to say, allow your parking to be flexible, so that you can allow for below minimums or even set maximums as opposed to just having rigid minimums. So, examples here out of the evaluation criteria. Of course, you see the criteria, and then you see expectations. Here's an example here out of 2.1.2, which says, your ordinance allows mixed-use buildings by right in designated areas of concentrated development. The ordinance requires one or more of the following elements in areas of concentrated development. You form code or form writers, you'll